Well, thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much for inviting us to reflect on our very different experiences of interdisciplinarity, both in terms of how we've participated in research projects that may be supposedly interdisciplinary, but also the nature of our PhDs, our academic careers, and so on. So we're in sort of quite different places. So what we're going to do today is to present each other each of us will present a little bit of our career trajectory. Then we'll look at some of the issues around interdisciplinarity and global challenges, because we both actually came together through a large UKRI funded what's called Global Challenges Research on gender justice and security. Because before then we had only sort of worked together a bit, but now we've been in each other's pockets almost since 2019. I'm quite enjoying it. Yes. And getting a lot out of our interdisciplinarity. And then we'll have a look at some of the challenges of interdisciplinarity, in part as it's applied to the global challenges. And then we'll end up with coming up with some suggestions of what we might do to improve the interdisciplinarity and get more out of it. So, so I think Anne's already said a little bit about me, but I wanted to focus on the fact that although I'm Professor of Gender, Migration and Citizenship today, in the sense at Middlesex, I originally came from geography. And I kind of reflect on that a bit because it's a discipline which I think is very conscious of having a place in the world. And I think it makes it often very interdisciplinary in some aspects and not in others. So what I've shifted into since the 1990s, originally while being in geography, but then shifting out altogether, is into migration studies, which is where I could say I'm placed, which is also a very geographical term today. And what's interesting in migration studies is it in itself, it has begun to move into what you could call, through the emergence of an epistemic community, it's actually moved into kind of shaping itself as a new discipline. And I think that's also quite interesting to look at it because you can see the trajectory it's taken. So it's done that by having its own conferences. It's done that by having a multitude of journals these days, and of course of networks. So I think what's interesting here is that it's beginning to reproduce, as we could say, the infrastructures of more traditional disciplines from which many of us in which we first did our undergraduate degrees and PhDs and so on. But I think what's interesting about it is it does draw upon different approaches and very different methodologies from across the traditional disciplines. And again, what's relevant for the talk today is that migration issues have risen to the very top of the agenda politically, in policy terms and in research terms. And I don't need to give you examples. And this is not just in the UK. I would say this is in a very wide range of countries globally. Next, Neelam. So
I'll just introduce myself very quickly. Anne has done a wonderful job of introducing me. I'm an economic anthropologist, and I'm also a post-conflict reconstruction expert. I work mainly in South Asia's fragile conflict-affected states. So where there's a war zone, I generally am present or working in South Asia. But my background is in history and in textiles and in conflict and in security. I work with displaced populations of women using circular economy approaches to sustainable incomes. I have worked on research commercialization that has thrown our donor a little bit about what happens next, connecting indigenous and tacit knowledge with a gendered lens. So I sit inside the Department of Design in the Faculty of Arts and Industries, but I wear a multiple range of hats, and least of all, which is the PhD in both disciplines, which was quite fun to do and quite toxic as a viva, actually 7 hours of it. So just the introduction of the multiple hats that exist at the same time.
Right. So I'm going to just talk a little bit here about the global challenges, which is our background talking about interdisciplinary, they've become much more significant. If you look in research terms, if you look at media coverage, if you look at policy and political discussions. And of course, what's also happened is that we've had multiple crises in recent years, which are demanding complex responses. And often those complex responses are seen to come from different disciplines, but also approaches. Here, I think these kind of complexities and crises are really pushing us to be more interdisciplinary. So the kinds of issues we could think about would be the energy crisis, which again is being very much top of the agenda. And the different forms of the energy crisis, which is linked again with climate change, with environmental change, with what we do about environmental change, with food supply, the inequalities of food supply, where does it come from, its sustainability, access to health services, and that's been particularly prominent during the COVID period, and we still are struggling with issues of long COVID. And migration, which is the subject I'm working in, and that too is again the issue of states in particular trying to stop people migrating, others having to in a sense deal with internal displacement, and of course, as Neelam has looked at, in terms of periods of conflict, and of course, gender equality, which is the hub that we're both of us working in. The gender equality, which in a number of states, and I think Afghanistan would probably take the cake here, has gone backwards, but backwards, you could say, in a big, big way. But this has also happened in a number of other states, both in terms of gender and sexual orientation equality. So these are some of the most pressing issues, and they're seen in recent years as being, I think, the public. It's not just us as a research community. I think it's both the media and the public see these issues as being much more interconnected than ever in the past, and was requiring, as I said earlier on, interdisciplinary responses. So the very nature of what is called the global demonstrates a much heightened overarching connectivity. So we understand within these issues of global challenges, inclusions, sustainability, capacity building, innovation, carbon footprints, artificial intelligence, and the shrinking of the globe for communication. These are all linked with some of these particular issues. So we've also evaluated and eliminated silos, and we've criticized unilateral approaches and decision-making. Again, these kind of crises and challenges have tended to push one to a much greater inclusivity in decision-making. So we've, as I've said several times now, there's been a call for, and the terms are slightly different, although they're not always kind of thought about very clearly. Interdisciplinary, intra-disciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, we could say multidisciplinarity, we could have been called upon and recognized as the pathways to which we could deploy in trying to confront. And actually, it's not just confront, but do something about global challenges. And here, this also comes with failures. As Maria has said, there are lots of failures, and we can overestimate, I would say, our ability to actually do anything about global challenges. So in these massive UKRI Global Challenges funds, the expectation is that you're somehow going to change the world. And I think what we've seen is it's very, very difficult, and it takes a long time, if at all, but there's a lot of backward steps as well. So one of the problems is that, of course, not only do we have challenges, but we face these multiple challenges simultaneously, as we've seen. And that's, I think, also become a lot clearer. COVID, the Ukraine war, and the energy and the food supplies that have been underpinning some of the challenges.
But also with the communities we work with, a person who's facing a food shortage can also have insecurity in their political environment. They could be facing gender discrimination, age-based discrimination, and then climate change on top of it. Mm-hmm. So there are multiple challenges simultaneously experienced by populations across the world. And I think that is where the challenge kind of goes.
Yeah. So I've already mentioned pressures to interdisciplinarity. We get the pressure from research councils, UKRI, which is the United Kingdom Research Innovation, but also we have this in European funds, which I won't go into, but the British still have access to in a complex way. So both in Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, and I'm currently involved in a Horizon Europe project, and where what is encouraged is that we have multiple disciplines in the same project. And the question I want to ask and that I've confronted is, what does multiple mean for interdisciplinarity? It may mean nothing, because you may work in your own little project with your own approach. So as I say here, inhabiting the same space doesn't necessarily mean understanding the epistemology of different disciplines and methodologies. So you may have in different disciplines, different forms of analysis, attitudes to causality, and I'll explain that in a minute, and temporalities. So, for example, I'm working in a project on African migrations out of Africa and within Africa with a German lead. And the leads are economists. And our mouths are often agape because there is the idea that causality is instantaneous. You do X and Y will happen. But if we look at, for example, the areas that Neelam is working in, or in social sciences, which I think have become more open to arts and humanities through areas like taking in narratives. So we're using, in the research I'm doing, we've incorporated narratives to try to show that the way that people narrate themselves, the way that they narrate their country, has a huge impact on migration. And therefore that we're kind of drawing out the context, we're enriching and we're thickening, as Geert said a long time ago, the context in which we're operating. And I would also, I think Maria talked about slow research. What I would call our end of the spectrum, the slow cooking of kind of research, because there is also this fast, instantaneous expectation. And that applies also to impact. Because obviously, if you're doing the slow cooking, the impact is also often much slower. So, right, Neelam.
And while we accept the need to think, I can't stand in one place and talk. I'll try.
Okay, I'll move.
I think there is an element of serendipity involved in these approaches. We are asked to think about interdisciplinarity. We are looking at shifting trends of, this is fashionable again, you must not sit in your silo. We still have to understand that the trend of where the funding goes and the trend of where you'll be appreciated, recognized, rewarded is different from the multidimensional challenges that exist, that press against our face at all points of time. We have the not so wonderful SDGs, and those wonderful SDGs will be replaced by something else. And how much progress have we really made? With all the research sitting in this room and outside of this room, how much difference have we really made? And I'm not talking about impact that can be counted and measured only. And these multidimensional challenges require a critical evaluation of our systems thinking approach. How are we designed to think in this room? You have been hardwired to think in a certain way. You have been hardwired to not think in a certain way. You're hardwired to critically evaluate some things only. The others are outside your comfort zone. And yet those others are perhaps where the solutions lie to the intractable problems that we face. And how do we then engage with each other? And understanding may emerge towards the end rather than the beginning. As Eleonore was saying, it's a slow approach to lasting change. And when you say impact, we're also talking about transformation. We're also thinking about change that is resilient in the future to further negative shifts. And understanding may emerge towards the end or the beginning, or it may remain a little dialogue. The conversations we are doing through our work on and in Afghanistan are constant dialogues. So much has changed since August 2021 and Taliban takeover that the little dialogues is all that we can kind of engage with as of now. But sometimes those dialogues between politics and security and gender and livelihood and humanitarian aid and girls' education, all completely separate areas. If you were to do a PhD, you'll be sitting across multiple departments, yet experienced by one set of people in one country. And so those dialogues between disciplines that are seemingly close to each other. Arts generally sits very nicely next to humanities. But then where are we with the scientists in this room and the medics and the management study people? Where do we sit? And what are these partnerships that are natural because we've been hardwired to think that they are? And what are those unnatural ones that we need to kind of force fit at some level? A little bit about the resilience of silos and a 1-minute exercise for those of you who are thinking about the lunch you've had. If I ask you to identify who you are, you will give me your name. If I ask you to tell me what you do, you'll probably tell me which department you belong to, or the topic of your PhD, or what you had done for research. We are comfortable in our space. We are comfortable in our box. We like the box. We like the stereotype. We like the pigeonhole. So how far have really come? These silos that Eleonore was talking about, these silos is where interdisciplinarity sits outside these silos. But we have to recognize honestly that the silos we have are silos we like. They are silos that are extremely resilient to any shift or change. Any change toward interdisciplinarity is generally cosmetic or surface level only, because you will retreat back to who you are and what you do the minute you go to a conference that is appropriate to your subject area. And do we need to now come a full circle and recalibrate ourselves? This is Schrodinger's cat. We need to do interdisciplinarity because it's back on trend, because it solves bigger problems, because it causes lasting change. But we also need to sit inside our silos because that's where we belong. You are inside a faculty, you're inside a department, you're inside a school, you're inside a space which recognizes your qualification or your work experience and fits you in there. So silos of thinking, of research, of practice, of outputs, of outcomes, units of assessment inside the ref, policy thinking. Can I go and inform policy and security? Yes. But when I tell them I'm from the Department of Design inside Middlesex University, will I be taken seriously? No, I will not be taken seriously. Well, now I am, but it would take a very long time, 25 years to reach this point. We carved up these silos. We carved them deliberately. In this part of the world, we define the disciplines, we define the subjects, and we kind of carved these silos up, shaped them, and then funded them as silos, and then promoted success within these silos. Each of us in this room will be able to identify these silos. And we often stride towards these boundaries when we work in inclusion. And more often than not, we classify those we meet outside in silo groups. So I might be a security gender expert, but you're a medic. Your box, my box, let's get some separation because this is my terrain. I am comfortable in this terrain. I know this terrain. I have a PhD in it. So I'm the expert. And that process where the silos provide me direction of my career, of my practice, of what I want to do. I also then meet other people in the silo who are an inspiration, who I want to chase, want to be like in 10 years' time. But also my silo rewards me for what I do. When I publish in a 4-star journal within my area of specialty, I get recognized for that. Can I publish in an intra, multi, transdisciplinary journal? If you know some good ones, please tell me. I'm still looking. But the rewards and recognition built into academia are built on those silos. Your promotion application will ask you for your publications. It will ask you for your keynote talks at conferences that are relevant to your area of work. We reward the silo, but we recognize the value of interdisciplinarity. So we are in a Schrodinger's box of kinds. We kind of had to be in both places at the same time. If anything, we should explore deeply and learn from this resilience of the silo, recognize it, that it exists. We are comfortable in this space, but also within our own thinking and work and the comfort they provide to us. But then and we are hardwired to think this silo, and we'll unpack some of these challenges. But the question remains that till we don't have some level of honesty about the silo behind me that I have come out of to talk to you here, and I will retreat back into that silo, till I'm not honest about that silo, I cannot think about interdisciplinarity, because it will just be retrofitted in. Or it will be something that I have force-fitted into how I think. So to introduce where we are talking about, we keep talking about the Gender Justice Security Hub. This hub is a 5-year, £20 million program. There are 12 hubs in the UK, funded by the UK government. Our hub is the Gender Justice Security Hub. We are based at London School of Economics. Middlesex University is the biggest partner they have. This hub operates in many countries across gender and conflict and gender-based violence across various countries. and it has 32 projects. I lead a project, and these projects sit under different work streams. The work stream I work in is called Transformation and Empowerment, and the work stream that Eleonore is in is called Migration and Displacement. There are 6 streams, 32 projects, 17 countries, and Eleonore will tell you about her area of work here.
I just think that we can probably go over this fairly quickly in terms of the content, because we've kind of discussed it. So the gender and migration studies actually focuses on conflict-induced displacement in the gendered labor markets and the restructuring of post-conflict states. And we look at how this also may give rise to competing tensions, including the creation of new opportunities and then the exacerbation of ethnic, religious, and gender-based divisions. And of course, I'm not going to go into it. We actually did the research during a very difficult period of COVID and reduction in budget due to the fact it was linked to UK aid.
And also Pakistan had floods.
Oh, yes.
Sri Lanka's economy melted. Afghanistan went up in smoke.
And yes, and Lebanon had triple crisis. So it's been a difficult. So again, coming back, Maria, with your failures, you can either see it as a failure, which is beyond your control, but you can think at the same time, how do I actually work with it? So, which is what we've tried to do. So I think here is the ability, I think, to be able, and I know this is not just interdisciplinary, but it's the ability to be able to work with what you've had to do and to confront the challenges, exactly the global challenges that you've actually, the research, the context the research has brought about.
That's right. This is the stream that I am in. I am no fan of the word empowerment or agency because the decolonial head in my head doesn't like these words, but here we are. This stream is looking at how conceptual empirical work will help us understand the potential to transform and empower other people, and how unequal gender relations, gender violence, underdevelopment, and socioeconomic inequality are persistent challenges in society. My work inside this sits inside South Asia across 4 countries, where I'm looking at how violence and intractability of acceptance of that violence and conflict are things that people live with across generations, and how that violence is connected to circular economies, to tacit knowledge, to what women know without going to university. How do they know what they know, and what value is it to them? So this is the project. And this project looks at how very many communities are on the move at all points of time. More refugees and more displaced people in our current world.
So actually we can say interdisciplinary.
So this is where the interdisciplinarity work comes in. Migration and displacement, I am transformation and empowerment, 2 different hats. But in my space, I'm working with groups and groups of women and children and girls and men who keep shifting in response to a war on their doorstep. They will move down the mountain sometimes. They will actually change cities sometimes. In the case of Afghanistan, they have changed countries and moved to Pakistan. So they carry with them their culture, often in the shape of material belongings, language, narratives, food, music, the stories your grandmother told you that you will not forget irrespective of where you live. And we use a mapping approach. So we have borrowed from anthropology how we map these cultures, how people hold these cultures and carry them with them. Through forced displacement and through voluntary migration, all these words I have just learned living next to Eleonore, not my area of work. But you work with communities who are experiencing this, and you understand the experience of moving from the discipline that as an expert in it. But then we look at the narrative that emerged from them and the understanding of tacit knowledge of labor, of creative labor, of the value for time. How you have been taught to embroider by your grandmother, but you never really used it till you sat in a refugee camp thousands of miles away from your house. Why would you go back to that? Why do people make what they make in a war zone when there is no reason to make? There is no purpose. What is the purpose? Am I looking at art as therapy? Another silo, not my area of work, but it does work. It does exist. We've looked at it. Are we looking at empowerment or understanding of identity-based politics? Who are we? What do we do? And why do we do it? Despite the politics around us, the insecurity around us, what is it about women that helps them carry this culture? And is it a burden? In a in a post-feminist space, is this a burden that I am responsible for my culture not dying, for my children knowing how to do the embroidery that my grandmother used to do? Am I responsible? But what is the tacit knowledge inside me? I did not go to university to learn this, but does that mean it doesn't get recognized? So we are asking all these kind of questions in a war zone to displaced populations, some of who are also in the last 3 years experiencing the impact of a massive pandemic and very rapidly changing climate situations. So this project reveals the value and relevance of culture-specific knowledge and skills to peace building. We are working with communities who are potential recruits to violent extremist organizations. And how does this culture play a role in that peace building space? So that is where we sit. So if you say which discipline does this project sit in, I don't have an answer. We sit inside international relations, politics, security and conflict studies, gender and women's studies, peace studies. We also sit inside art, craft, and material culture. We look at design thinking. We also look at research commercialization about how businesses, microfinance works for women in these spaces. And then we also look at the intergenerational connection between what mommy knows and what child will know, but also intergenerational burden of care that comes out of conflict spaces. So, but where am I supposed to publish this? I don't know. Do I need a monograph? Maybe. It'll take me 10 years to write it. But the point is that in a space where interdisciplinarity is transforming the lives of those on the ground and now that we've done this for 4 years, we know that we are causing a positive shift based on how we are mapping the shift from the participants' perspective. I'm not ticking boxes saying, yep, done. It's their response back to the project and how they cascade what we do into their lives and their neighbors' lives and their communities' lives, that we can see there's a positive transformation. But how does this positive transformation get captured at any point of time? And how can we capture this in a way that allows different disciplines to engage with it, learn from it, take it, run with it? How do we do that? So the project...
I think you'd better...
I'll wind up. I think I might run out of time.
More to say still.
Yeah. So what is in my toolkit? The ability to map cross-cuts and intersectional inequalities is in my toolkit. I could see intersectional inequalities because of what I do, but intersectional inequalities on the ground and how they cross-cut across challenges and disciplines is something that we had to look at. Understanding carefully the complexity of identity and what war and conflict does within it is another lens. Understanding multidimensional insecurity and security and the politics of war and the economics of poverty. They are two separate things that work at the same time in these zones. Accepting and understanding the invasive, omnipresent, deeply embedded patriarchal thinking in these spaces, which is impossible to shift, but very easy to find. Recognizing and accepting data biases and exclusions on the basis of gender. Women are erased from 50% of the data you will ever read. We don't exist. I think with AI coming along, this is a separate question, not for this talk. Identifying and pushing back against colonial constructs of knowledge and their embeddedness. When we do research in the UK with others outside of the UK, we other them very automatically. And that post-colonial decolonization of research funding, of interdisciplinarity is absolutely essential. Otherwise, we are just going to replicate knowledge hierarchies and own all of it. So we come to the challenges of interdisciplinarity and to sum up where we are. You want to start with the last one?
No, you can. So
while we are being in honest mode here, our funding structures are specifically designed to fund us in a specific way. If you are looking for arts and humanities related fund and you go to the Medical Research Council, they will not even consider your application. The calls for funding come down discipline routes. You know your parent council for funding, your parent foundation that will fund your kind of research. You know where to go. They're usual suspects. And they do not promote interdisciplinarity. They might mention it on top as something that you should be interested in, but not further than that. How deep does it go? Should we be questioning our ability to make the world a better place by questioning the donors' priorities on interdisciplinarity? How does our doctoral journey, which is the, split a hair and split again a billion times and get a PhD out of it, you've been trained to be really, really good and an expert at something very specific. And the minute you get the PhD, you're expected to go that way and go broad interdisciplinary. How? Who's teaching you how to do this? who's funding you how to do this? Where are you going to teach when you do that? If you are teaching, how are you going to write if you write? What is your principle that determines where you go and what you do a PhD in? And how does that principle hold true after the PhD is done in your research? How broad and far can you go when you have been specializing in something that is micro? The way we recognize and reward research and publishing is something that comes in our way of interdisciplinarity. If we really want to understand what went wrong and have an institute of mistakes, those mistakes are interdisciplinary at all times. How are we looking at gathering the failures of research? How are we looking at rewarding research that doesn't benefit one person? And I have a particular bugbear about publishing. In the 8 languages that we run this project in, one of which is English, if I publish in English behind a £178 paywall, none of the people I work with will ever read the research or ever understand what was written about them, with them, for them. How are we promoting writing in not native languages? How are we publishing in not native languages? And why do they never feature? Having sat at UKRI at different panels as part of UKRI employee network, the number of literature reviews that we received in a proposal for funding that cited only English work or work written only in English, when there's bodies and bodies of work written in local languages that was just not even mentioned. It's usual for us to do that. We need to question that space. Can we publish a 4-star article in a not English language in this part of the world? If you know the answer, please come and tell me later. There's a lack of context and platform that celebrates interdisciplinarity. If I am looking for interdisciplinarity or projects that are interdisciplinary in their nature, essentially, honestly, right down to the core, I don't know where to look for them. We don't have a natural home. We don't sit outside a university center because centers are usually discipline specific or area specific. Where am I looking for these? Where is the platform or the context in which I can find all this fantastic work that other people have done that I could learn from and use? There isn't a space for us, though we are very trendy, to fund. I should stop there.
And the last point, it seemed to me also that we need to actually think about how do we train people to engage in interdisciplinary thinking and practices. It doesn't necessarily come naturally. And what I've found in the projects I've participated in is they stay multidisciplinary, where each group or person does their own thing. But the example I gave of economics before, we need to understand what is their methodology, how are they thinking, and how do we engage with them? Because unless we do that, we're staying in our box. So that would be, I think, our final contribution to the discussion about the challenges, you could say, of interdisciplinarity.
There's a challenge. Thank you so much. I think that was a very good place to certainly end an afternoon of talks before we go into a poster session. We have, I think, exactly 5 minutes.
We started late, actually. I think
There's a question there.
There's a question. There's a question. There's 2 questions already. So make your questions quick. And direct. There's a question here, the lady in lavender.
Okay, sorry, I have a cross voice. I have some cold, so I hope you can hear me clearly. Thank you so much for your discussion. This is really like something I wasn't expecting to hear over here, but I'm so glad you spoke about it. What I really want to find out about when you talked about migration and gender. And I've realized that most times when we talk about migration, the females or women are not really taken into consideration in some countries. Like there's really little you can really talk about what goes on. And I'll just give you a representation of maybe my background so that you understand where I'm coming from.
I'm conscious we've got 5 minutes.
Okay. So I will talk about it later on. But when it comes to gender, where you have women who are living desperate, terrible situations, coming to a country pregnant without even having an idea of, what goes next, like how they're going to give birth in that country. And, there's really nowhere to go, like where to help them or how to do about it. So I don't know if maybe your work covers those kind of situations where you have people in very precarious situations that they don't have like what to do and at the point of delivery.
Yes, I mean, we do look at issues. The project itself was mainly looking in the so-called global south, which we both have problems with, but that's another talk we could give. So we've been mainly working in South Asia and in the Middle East. And yes, those kind of situations, there are numerous across the research projects that we're looking at within the area framing of gender and migration. Happy to talk to you after.
But then I think there is this whole thing of when you arrive, you are back into silos. Are you home office? Do you need the NHS? Are you female? Are you underage? Do you speak English? The silos appear again at every challenge, right? Is one challenge, multiple answers.
Okay, I think there was another lady with her hand up in the middle. This will be our last question.
Hello, hi. I'm very thank you for the interesting presentations. I'm Nurul from Malaysia. And basically, I'm a lecturer right now. But then my expertise is basically media, all right? But my subject is more on marine sustainability. And I got a grant from my government, basically, which they acknowledge my interdisciplinary perspective. However, in my organizations, I am the pioneer for this particular interdisciplinary courses. So I don't know how I can, like my concern is, I don't know how I can relate or I can talk or having a discussion with a pure science, which marine experts itself, right? For example, marine scientists and so on, which sometimes it creates conflict because what are they believe, but their perspective is very different from mine. So that's how can I establish my expertise in my organization so that other people will acknowledge that as well? Thank you so much.
Do you want to respond?
Your expertise as an interdisciplinary person, it goes as far as you're being able to engage with those who you don't understand.
Yeah.
If you don't understand them, you need to talk to them.
Okay.
Because there's a halfway house there. There's a lot to learn. And that security that comes from saying, I know what I know. I have no clue what you're talking about, but I'm willing to listen and I'm willing to understand. You will find all of these challenges have a human inside them, in the middle of them. You will find that middle ground. And that is what will establish you.